Hey guys, hope everybody's doing great today and getting really excited for our upcoming spring break. I'm just here to give you a quick little video on Jim Crow laws. This is going to be a shorter one. Expect a second video later today or early tomorrow about imperialism. All right, remember, as always, if you're still writing, doing the notes along with my video, just pause before I go to the next slide. All right, let's get started. So as you probably know, you've heard of the Jim Crow laws. We talked about segregation a little bit at the end of the last unit. All right. These laws that created racial segregation were nicknamed the Jim Crow laws. It came from a super racist song from 1828 called Jump Jim Crow, which was performed by a white guy in blackface. All right. Here is a racist caricature of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was not a real person. That is a very common misconception in history that these laws were named after a real person. They were not. Jim Crow was not a real person. All right? These laws were created at the end of Reconstruction to replace the black codes. They were a little bit stricter than the black codes, and they lasted for much longer. As we know, the Jim Crow laws lasted until the mid-1900s. All right, we're going to the next slide now. All right, Jim Crow laws required separate facilities for whites and colored people. All right, I would avoid using this word in everyday language. It is extremely insensitive and racist. All right, but as you can see on the picture, this is how they denoted which facilities were segregated. You had your white and your colored facilities, water fountains, restrooms, restaurants, and public transportation. All right, this led to inferior education, healthcare, and transportation for African Americans. This is a colored school from probably the late 1800s or early 1900s. As you can tell, it looks a little run down. The kids are all crammed in there. It's not a very good facility. And that's how a lot of these separate facilities were. Okay? They operated under the pretense that they were going to be equal to the white facilities, but of course they rarely, if ever, were. They were usually much worse, and they just got the old stuff. So if they built a new white school, then the new colored school would be just the old white school that wasn't good enough for the white kids. We know now, hindsight is 2020, that is extremely unfair and racist. Okay? So let's talk about Plessy versus Ferguson for a second. Plessy versus Ferguson was one of the most important civil rights Supreme Court cases there ever was. All right. In 1892, this guy, Homer Plessy, was arrested for violating segregation laws by sitting in a white-only railroad car. He was classified as a colored person for being 1/8 African American. All right, one of his great-grandparents was black. Plessy sued, saying the law violated his 13th and 14th Amendment rights, which he was right. However, the Supreme Court was made up of all justices that were from before Reconstruction, and they ruled against him. They upheld Jim Crow laws. They upheld segregation in Plessy versus Ferguson. They said separate facilities were legal as long as they were equal in quality. This created the separate but equal doctrine. And now, just for a second, I'm going to go back to some of the older pictures that we looked at in previous slides. All right, this clearly is separate, but it is not equal. You can tell this one is much nicer than this one. This one looks like just a random one they found in a junkyard or something. It's not equal. It is separate, but it's not equal. This, I promise you, was not equal in quality to the white schools. Okay? So, although slavery had ended, we still did not have equal rights for black people. Right? Because of the decision, Southern states expanded segregation. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, which you've probably heard of, was created to challenge segregation in the courts. They worked for almost 60 years and finally succeeded in Brown versus the Board of Education, a Supreme Court case in 1954 which declared that segregation in schools was illegal. All right. It would take about 15 years after this for segregation to end completely, but it was a huge step in the right direction. All right. And as you can see here, the next video will be on American imperialism. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys later.